Let's talk about it.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thicc Radio, the gaming podcast where we take a deep dive into gamer culture and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim. Let's get into it. Today we're joined by a special guest. You know them, you love them. It's Hudson.
Yay!
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you for being here. Thank you so much.
Of course.
How are you?
I am good. I'm doing very well. It's spring. It's, transitioning into that time. Nicer weather. Always lifts the mood up. It's fantastic.
Oh, good. How are you in terms of allergies? Are you an allergy person?
No, thank God. I typically this changing of the seasons doesn't really do too much to me, thankfully. So I don't have to worry about all of that. I know people who struggle with allergies, and it is not something I'd wish on anyone. So grateful for that.
I, on the other hand, am dying slowly from my allergies every spring, every fall. Though lately they've been hitting me in December, which is the weirdest time for allergies to hit me. But I think it has to do with where I live. When it dries out and warms up a little bit, all that mold and dust on the leaves just starts kicking up again.
Yeah.
I mean,
I can imagine.
Global warming, we had snowfall here mid to late January. I think it might have even been February when everything was meant to be defrosting. We actually had our first snowfall. But we're actually here today to speak on a bit of an ambiguous subject, really. It's more a term, I think, that gainers use in common parlance rather than something that's documented on or really seen out and about in the world. I'm referring to belly sexuality or being belly sexual, fatsexual, and its relation to the asexual spectrum, because I think a lot of us probably identify with that in some way, shape, or form. So to kick things off, Hudson, I just want to put it out there, a lot of what people seem to say regarding these definitions, fatsexual, belly sexual, seems to mean a focus on fat and the physical form rather than genitalia, so to say. There are other sexual definitions that exist that confirm a non-genitalia focus, like pansexuality, demisexuality, sapiosexuality. But I want to ask you, how is it that you identify with those terms?
So personally, I do identify as gray asexual, and what I would definitely call, fat or belly sexual in those terms. For me, my sexuality has always been more focused around, like you said, the form as opposed to specifically the genitalia. And I think it's definitely something in the community that's more common than maybe in other areas of the gay culture at large, simply because of the community's focus on specific body parts that aren't necessarily genitalia. But it is something that ranges in the spectrum. So myself personally, I would much rather do things that are specifically gaining related in the bedroom, whereas for other people, it's just part of kink play that feeds into what we consider your standard sexual intercourse using penetrative sex. So it definitely runs the gamut of the community, and I lean more towards the what I consider a gray asexual spectrum. Yes.
I didn't realize how many gainers fell into this spectrum. I think because it was just a lack of exposure when I was younger, like 18 to say 26 range. When I went out and into the gay community, sex was just as normal as everything else, and people kind of just expected that from each other. And I don't know how many of us just gave in because it was expected. We joke about how I'm a slut, but I have been around quite a bit and had quite a bit of sex, both gainer and civilian. And I guess it just kind of took me by surprise how many people really identify on this asexual spectrum. And the first gainer that I really encountered who was on this spectrum, we met up and he said, I'm totally okay with you touching my belly, playing with it. You can kiss it. You can, stick your tongue in my navel, but I don't want to go any further. He's like, I don't even kiss. I'm like, okay. It wasn't something that I was used to, but it was something I could definitely flow with. I'm like, if I really need to do something, I can just file all this away in my spank bank and take care of it later. It was a brand new experience for me, but it was a very positive one.
I think like most of the people here, I identify on the gray asexual. I would say I'm more gray asexual than anything else in terms of that. And to pose a point of clarity, I should say, because I think sometimes when we talk about asexuality, we tend to think, oh, that is the single unit of your sexual and romantic person, that I'm a gay, you are a straight, this person is an ace or asexual. And while that might be the case in some regard, we actually, to put out the concept there to people who may not have considered this, we all exist on multiple spectrums simultaneously. So, for those of us who might refer to ourselves as gay or straight or bisexual, those are sexual identities that more tend to relate to gendered bodies and things that you might be attracted towards, whereas concepts like asexuality and anything really on that spectrum tends to refer more towards the level of intensity that you might desire penetrative sex with another person. So asexual is obviously on the far end of this spectrum, meaning ace, nope, zilch, nada, not a little bit of any genitalia for me, please, interested in none of it. Leading up through gray asexual spectrum, where Hudson and I both identify, where we don't quite want it as much as everyone else, but we want it a little bit more than none. To the middle of the spectrum, which standard sexuality is referred to as allosexual. Allosexuality, meaning you are simply net neutral on the amount that you might want, neither more or less than the average person.
I did not know that.
No, it's okay. But, you learn something new every day. Back when I was at uni, I don't know if that term existed. When I used to look through sexual spectrums trying to teach myself about things, it used to just say sexual in the middle. Now the term is allosexual. So if you have never had to reckon with wanting too much or too little sex, you are probably an allosexual. And then, of course, leading up to hypersexual at the far end of the spectrum, which is more widely reported on people who crave a large amount of sex and function very highly in terms of what people might refer sexual appetite. And all of these things I think are important for us to know, because whether we're talking about the gay community, the straight community, sex is a huge thing, and our ability to, fulfill someone's sexual desires. And so when we have interactions with people, our potential worth in the eyes of others might be based and biased a little bit on what we're able to accommodate. And for those of us who, are somewhere on the left-hand side of the spectrum, gray asexual and otherwise, probably find ourselves in some uncomfortable situations where we have to make some compromises that we wouldn't normally be comfortable with. And in terms of personal growth in the community, that's an important factor for us to realize. So with all of that said, I want to ask Hudson, have you had those types of experiences yourself?
Absolutely. So, great. It's really great that you bring up the concept of existing on different spectrums, because even within asexuality as a concept, there is a large amount of variety in terms of what you might consider the farthest end of the spectrum, something that is sex repulsion, which is, as you said, no, none for me. I don't even want to think about it. It does me a disservice to think about it or participate in it. Leading more towards the gray end of the spectrum, when you still may not have the desire to, you still are asexual in that, you're much more willing to participate and be engaged for the sake of another person. And that's not out of any pushing through discomfort. It's just I could do with it or without it. But for this person that I'm interested in on another level, whether it be romantic, sensual attraction, whatever, I'm going to do it because it's fun. And that's kind of where I fall. I think it's something that I'm willing to do. I enjoy it, but I don't necessarily desire it. And I think that's a differentiation that's important when you're talking about asexuality.
I actually, it kind of makes me cringe to think that anyone is being put in a situation where they don't want the sexual contact, but the person that they're interested in does. And I would really hope that anyone who is on the spectrum and doesn't want the sex is not giving in just to please the other person, because that's so cringeworthy to me. It's no, you need to respect the other person's desire, or lack thereof, because to me, when you push that on someone who doesn't want it, there's only one word for it. Yeah, I don't. It's you got to be so careful with this kind of stuff, and obviously, this is also about clear communication. Letting them know, hey, this is what I am okay with. This is what I am not okay with.
Yeah, and to that point, I think, like I said, for varying levels, for me personally, there have been cases where, like I said, I don't necessarily have the desire to, but I do it. I go through with any number of activities out of desire for the person, there is absolutely a level of communication, and I think a level of expectation, in the sense that we do live in a society where allosexual is the norm and sexual activity is expected to be a part of a relationship. And in my own personal relationships, because I identify as gray asexual, I have what you consider a much lower sex drive than someone who might identify as allosexual. And that is a level of communication within a relationship that definitely needs to happen. Otherwise, when you get that breakdown in communication, when one person feels like their needs aren't being met, it creates a lot of discord in the relationship. And it's something that I think ace people specifically struggle with in terms of the expectation and not being able to meet that expectation.
Absolutely. I think managing expectations is a phrase that comes up a lot in the podcast, actually, because it's the number one reason why things break down. People walk into sex expecting there to be this plethora of things happening. People walk into a feeding session with expectations on what's going to happen, and people don't talk, and then there are problems, and then there's any number of things that can happen. For me, I think the biggest factor in really having this conversation is, one, to put it out there for people who may not know. This gives a language and a framework of understanding who they are and how they can better understand things. I think a lot of people who exist somewhere on the ace or gray ace spectrum, having those experiences, probably feel a sense of, I'm weird, I'm hesitant to say damaged in some way, because I don't seem to want sex as much as everyone else. And I have to perform, I have to do this. This is the norm. This is what it's expected. And it can create a lot of anxiety and depression and negativity because of those reasons. But the second point to be made there, I think, is that it is, as Hudson says, a negotiation. For many of us, we don't necessarily feel an immediate desire for the sex. But if we like someone, if we're having a good time with someone, if it's just something we may even desire to do. Some of us, I would describe myself as a pleaser in terms of those sexual acts. I may not be desiring to engage with someone's genitalia, but I might know that that person really enjoys that. And if I'm a pleaser and I just want to make them a little bit happy, I might look at that as, it's no skin off my nose to go
Absolutely.
and do something there that's going to bring them a bit of joy. It doesn't take away from me in that moment. But again, that's that negotiation. It's the communication and discussion that is also based from me knowing myself, where I sit on that spectrum, that I can operate in confidence and know that I'm not damaged, I'm not broken, I'm actually perfectly fine just being me. So with all that said, of course, we're talking about fatsexuality, belly sexuality, which we'll just simplify and say fatsexual, belly sexual. Again, terms bandied around the community, which seems to be tied with this. So I want to ask you guys, how, when it comes to the sexual side of your sexuality, when it comes to gaining and fat and weight and body weight and shape and size and mass and all of that, how does that manifest for you?
It's an interesting question, because it's not something that you sometimes think about so discreetly. I think for me, in a lot of ways, it is just a kind of, like I would say, a generalized pleasure from, I think there are a lot of different ways. And one of the beauties of gaining, in my opinion, is the number of ways in which people engage with it in interest, whether it's just the actual aspect of fat itself, whether it's the aspect of growth and change and transformation, whether it's the food aspect. There's a lot of different ways you can engage with it. For me, I think the biggest way that I see it as is just an expression of pleasure that kind of sees somebody happy and comfortable, and they kind of feel like letting go. You can see someone's let themselves go. I see that as a positive. It's a not living with so much worry. And so with my sexuality, it's kind of just a generalized pleasure that I see when I see someone who's larger and someone who enjoys their size, someone who's trying to get bigger, myself getting bigger as a gainer. Engagement was like a generalized pleasure, not necessarily as a focused attraction that I feel, myself getting hard over or anything like that.
So I guess because I would fall under the classification of allosexual, I don't really think about it, fatsexuality, too much in my own body, but like in my experiences with other men, say like the one gainer that I met up with who classified himself as belly sexual, he wanted the belly rubs, he wanted me to play with his belly, he was okay with me kissing it, nibbling at it, he was okay with me getting my tongue into his navel or my fingers into his navel, but that's where it would stop. It couldn't go any further than that. And I was okay with it. I really didn't have a problem with that, because personally, I can worship a belly for hours. Like, I've met up with some very big men, and even though we were naked and we both eventually came, the bulk of us being together was me doing that to them. It was me worshiping their fat, essentially. And that was the majority of the time we spent together, and it was perfect for me. Like, I didn't need to penetrate any of them. I didn't need any of them to penetrate me. You know, we didn't do any oral sex, and I left there happy as a clam because I got exactly what I came for, and they got what they came for. Now, if they had wanted to be, you know, have their underwear on or even their pants on during all of that, that would have been fine with me too. Because like I said, I can always go home and my imagination and my photographic memory work well for me. So I don't absolutely have to have everything right then and there. So that's how it manifests for me with other people. I have yet to kind of explore it in myself, though.
And like, you know, James was saying, it's that negotiation. It's making sure that both parties get what they want without sacrificing their own, you know, levels of comfort. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, I often found, and, you know, because we all started off slim, you know, before the gaining process. I remember when I was more the chaser type, you know, having hookups with larger men, you know, because of the nature of being a larger person who isn't a gainer, you know, a lot of those interactions are body negative. There's a lot of shame attached. There's a lot of, I'm surprised you're even here with me. You know, I'm just such a disgusting fat thing. You know, you're a saint for even being with, you know, and it's that vibe, and it's very heartbreaking, especially as people who love what they've got going on.
I know. Tell me about it.
And there were a few times where there were guys who they didn't know what they wanted sexually. They were just bewildered that someone had met up with them, which again, heartbreaking. But I would sort of look at those moments as, you know, I have an opportunity to really show them what sex can be. And so without even really touching their dicks, I would spend most of the time taking off their clothes and, you know, lotioning their bodies, loving their bodies, kissing and using, you know, frontwards, the front side of the nails, and then the back side of the palm, you know, doing things like tactile hand on the flesh and just running my digits over them, you know, and using my fingers to just explore these nooks and crannies and folds and moments on their bodies that they're thinking, no one's ever touched me there like that before. I wash it with soap because I have to. I didn't realize that people could enjoy this part of me. And sometimes it's so beautiful to see people realize that their own physical form, in a way, can basically be like one huge piece of genitalia, you know? And that's how I often see fat bodies when it comes to sex. You know, the penis, the genital region, that's one part of sex. For me, on a fat person, their entire fat body is that piece of genitalia. And I have the pleasure of spending as much time as it takes to do circuits, to run laps around that body, to enjoy it in all these different wonderful little ways.
There was a big boy that I met up with several times, and the first time that we got together, so he had never had anyone stimulate that, you know, the area of like the fold between his gut and, you know, where the top of the pelvis starts, you know, that really sensitive underbelly area. No one had ever simulated that for him.
Oh, wow.
The moans that I solicited out of that man were...
It's amazing sometimes.
Yeah.
I think what we're talking about is kind of a level of sensuality along with sex. And I think that goes a long way towards developing comfort with someone and helping someone who may have a body negative view to say, no, this is beautiful and something that isn't just get me off, but it's something to be appreciated and loved irrespective of my attraction to it. And I think that is a great part of, you know, what I'll call fat sex, is that level of sensuality is really present because there's so much to appreciate, if you want to put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think sensuality, you know, just to put it out there, is something we often miss in most sexual encounters. You know, sensuality, I think, in what you could term as in the bog standard factory normal cis het sex, is rubbing on the boobs and touching a little butt and going, oh baby, and then like that's all that happens before they get down to the dick and down. And listen, there's nothing wrong with getting the dick and down if that's what you want to do, but I think there is a big outcry amongst a lot of us for sensuality, especially when it comes to gayness, because what we devote our lifestyles to is the growth based in the love and appreciation of our own bodies. So we would logically want someone to take about as much time to love on our bodies, to trace their fingers over our stretch marks and our growth and our new rolls and folds and tell us how well we've done, how great we're doing, how good we look, salivate over the transformation and how different we look. All those little things that, to gainers listening, you all know exactly what we're talking about. It's all of those moments. I want to ask you guys if you're familiar with the concept of being autosexual.
Yes, I am personally.
Go for it. What does it mean?
So autosexual is we kind of call self-attraction. It is being aroused by yourself, by things about your body, personality, or other aspects of yourself that turn you on, and it usually it becomes sort of like jerking off to yourself. And that's something that I think a lot of gainers can see, because we are the best. If you're a gainer, you're the best example of what you want out of gaining. And so it's a lot of times you'll see a lot of attraction in your own body, which is phenomenal. It's a great example of having a positive self-image, is turning yourself on just looking at yourself. And so it does have kind of an interesting play, because there are absolutely people who are allosexual who experience autosexuality, people who are turned on by themselves. But there are people who are asexual that also do. I might not have any sexual desire to do with other people, but I do feel sexual desire thinking about myself and getting myself off. A lot of people who purely enjoy masturbation, for example, often fall in the spectrum as well.
No, I mean, that sums it up beautifully. I think for many of us, like, I wouldn't necessarily term myself autosexual, but I know for a damn fact that it happens. And I can almost, I can actually think of the first moment it happened. It was actually after I'd moved here, and I was getting changed out of a shower, doing our thing where I'd like bent over with the towel to, rubbity rub between the legs. And the mirror was off to the side of me. And I remember looking and thinking, holy shit, is that me? I'd grown so quickly in such a short period of time that at a sight glance, I didn't recognize myself. And then when I realized that it was myself, that was when the erection had happened. That was when the arousal started, because I then went, oh my God, I am so gorgeous. I look so good. And it is this amazing snowball effect that I swear I have never felt in my life before. And I think there are gainers out there, again, listening, who know what I'm talking about, that this is the moment when you know that you are on the right path and you are doing something right, because you just go, this is it. You are Alyssa Edwards looking in the mirror on Drag Race going, honey, sweetie, you could never come for perfection. You could, it's an amazing sensation. And I think a lot of what we find attractive in terms of belly sexuality, because we know ourselves. We know ourselves because we love to run our fingers over ourselves, love and caress our bodies, figure out what feels good on our bodies. So when someone else comes into the mix, we've already got the report card laying out for them where they'll go, let me pleasure you. And you're like, I already know what I like. I like it when you do this. I like it when you tweak this. I want you to put your fingers here. I want you to do this, 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 and this. A lot of gainers are very familiar with that because we know our own bodies already.
Yeah, and I think something else that kind of plays into that as well is, in addition to autosexuality, there's this concept that I came through my own research when I was trying to figure out, what's the best way to describe myself and my sexual preferences, is autochorus sexuality, which is kind of based on the same thing, but is not necessarily attraction to yourself, but in the same way how we said, like, you don't necessarily feel desire for other people. Sometimes it's really that phrase of, jerking off is enough for me. That's my ideal form of getting off. And that's something that is a little more accepted, I think, because there are people who, there are well-known people who just prefer to bait or whatever. But
so is that where gooning came from then? Is that this whole gooning movement that I've seen? Gooning, yeah. There's I know it's not new, but I don't know if just recently they've come up with a better word for it or whatever, but now it's like just goon all day, man, gooning. Like that's what they just, like, the chronic masturbator. In fact, I follow someone on Twitter called Goon Stupid, where it's just images and guys of, like, and like they're the cheesy memes are like goon all day, and like, where they're making like a cum face and like, oh, it's like, so right. I'm wondering if that's where it comes from.
I think it is important to differentiate between something in that respect that I think is more of a kink for some people versus what is a sexual desire. Because some people it's a weird space to play in, right? Because some people feel, arousal from the fact that it's a kink. For other people, it's just, kind of who they are. So, for example, though I might describe myself as autocore sexual, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a gooner or anything like that, because that plays into a specific kink headspace, which is great for some people. And I'm, all for kink positivity, but I think it does a disservice to immediately lump anyone who feels that way into what this kink headspace is. So I think there's a differentiation there, but there may be some interplay there as well in terms of people who view it as their primary sexual activity. Yeah.
So a point that I actually want to ask the pair of you is, are you familiar with something called the genderbread person?
Vaguely heard of it, but have never investigated, so I'm curious.
So I was introduced to this when I was at university. It's called the genderbread person, and in its most simplistic form, it's a tool to best help people understand the source of where several gender and sex and romance-based constructs come from, and the different spectrums that we exist on simultaneously. So this is a really good example of something that you can hand out to people, especially people who are trying to educate themselves. You do a seminar on, let's say, oh, here is a rough rundown of different gender and sexual identities. Now in this genderbread person, plot on these timelines where you sit. And it's often quite interesting when you challenge people to have to verbalize and place where their cisgenderedness might exist or where their heterosexuality might exist, that when they actually confront it, it may not be quite on the extreme end of the spectrum as they usually propagate. It might be a little softer than that. So
yeah, very, very cool. I think I was familiar with a lot of these concepts, but I love how it's put together, and definitely the importance of saying that feminine, like for example, femininity and masculinity are not opposite ends of the spectrum. They are separate spectrums that run, and you can be in different places on both. I think that's really important because it is so ingrained in us that it is masculine, feminine, man, woman, gay, straight, and then if you're in the middle of all those, that's an identity in and of itself. So I think this is a much neater way to put it, and I love it as a resource. Absolutely.
Definitely. We're going to put this up on the Instagram, actually, for anyone listening, just so that everyone can have this as a point to refer to. It's definitely a tool that's helped me in the past. From what I can tell, this is the latest version that's up and running, made in 2017 by Sam Killerman. But hopefully, as time goes on, more resources will be made available to people. So listen, if you're listening out there and you know of other gender, sexual-based resources that might be helpful for people in terms of a plot, please get in touch with us. Let us know, because as we said earlier, a lot of this is all about helping people to better understand themselves and to better help relate themselves to others. So, I mean, we kind of touched on this as well a little bit before, Hudson. You were saying, there's a sensual aspect to being attracted to someone, but when we talk about asexuality, I think a lot of people get this idea of like, oh, you're asexual. That kind of means you're like a robot. You don't want to touch, kiss, you don't want to fuck, you don't want to be friends with people. Like, I don't know, sometimes the ideas of what makes up an asexual person is very very bleak and very wrong.
Yes.
I find.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I just want to put out a few concepts there to people that they would need to be mindful of. So you can be asexual, but it might be in relation to different types of attraction. So yes, asexual might be sexual attraction. You may not want to have physical sexual interaction, penetrative sex with someone. It might be on the romantic spectrum. So you might be someone who is aromantic, right? So someone who doesn't want to engage in romantic or affectionate relationships with a significant other. And it's important to note that while you may be ace on one spectrum, you're likely not going to be ace on another. It's not to say it's not impossible. There may be people who are ace across multiple different spectrums, but generally speaking, whatever you're ace in tends to be made up in terms of connection with other areas, because for the most part, people are still looking to connect with other people. Do you know what I mean? With that said, Hudson, have you had many experiences with people having those kinds of interactions with you where you've disclosed a sense of your sexuality and they've come out at you with one of those wrong assessments about your sense of self?
Thankfully, no. I've had a very positive experience with everyone who is, for the most part, people who have interacted with personally. I've had all positive reactions. There are, of course, when you put yourself out on social media, you're opening yourself up to a lot of people. There are people who have definitely come at me with the wrong opinion. So, for example, when I post on social media, specifically Grommr and things related to that, I'm openly sexual and I talk about kink play and kink headspace and all sorts of that stuff. And I've had a lot of people come at me kind of saying, well, you talk about being ace, but you're here talking about all this kink stuff and turning, and talking about this sexual stuff. And I think that's kind of like how I mentioned, wanting to talk about things in all sorts of different perspectives. Just because you talk about kink does not necessarily mean you are doing it out of arousal or out of attraction. I talk about it because I enjoy it, but it doesn't necessarily convey a sexual desire or sexual attraction to someone. And that's what the core of asexuality is about. It doesn't mean you don't feel things, and it doesn't mean you don't have, it doesn't mean you're not into kink or anything like that. You can be ace and into kink, like myself. But there's definitely a level of misconception out there with what asexuality is and how it relates to other areas of the LGBT spectrum.
That's really cool.
I think the people who come at you and say that you are, you're ace, but you're talking about all this kinky stuff, don't really understand what kink is about, because as someone who's been around in the kink community for a while, I know a lot of people who engage in certain kinks like rope play or other types of bondage, or they don't actually come. There's no actual sexual contact that happens. Like, I know people who go through a play scene and they get exactly what they want out of it, but there was no penetration, nobody came, but they both walked away totally happy. I've seen people get flogged and get exactly what they needed out of that. And again, there was no exchange of body fluids. There was no actual, penetrative act going on. So I think the people that criticize you for it really don't understand kink.
No, and I think that is, I could go on this topic for hours, but I think really at its heart there is just this expectation that, sex is kind of a monolithic thing and everything related to sex is inherently sexual. Whereas that's really not the case. As we've seen, there are things that weave in and out, things that do come into sexuality. Like, there's absolutely kink play that is very sexual and people get what they want out of that. And there's kink play that's not sexual. It's not necessarily one monolithic thing. And that's what I'd consider a misconception that I think would do a lot of good if it went away forever, is this idea that everything kink related is sexual and it's just one monolithic thing. We could do away with that. That would be nice.
Listen, Santa, if you're tuning into Thicc Radio and listen, you're a fat bastard, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be. Listen, little boy Hudson over here, on his Christmas list, all he's asking for is the eradication of the monolithic idea of sex. Now, I don't think that's much to ask for a stocking stuffer. Just a stocking stuffer, like stuffing.
Yeah, it's no pony,
Thank you. I mean, I kind of want to put that back to you, Tim, because you're someone who, as you say, you've engaged in a lot of kink over the years. You've seen a lot of these experiences. I want to ask you, what have your personal experiences been like with people who you've known to be on the asexual spectrum, if any?
With some of the larger men that I've been with, I don't know if they actually fell on the asexual spectrum or not, but I think because of the way that I engaged with them and I made it all about body worship, I made it all about sensuality, there really wasn't a lot of sex, penetrative or otherwise, that happened between us. And I have a friend that lives out in Chicago who identifies somewhere on the asexual spectrum. And I went and spent time with him. We played with each other's bellies. He was okay with kissing. But when it came down to, anything, like basically he wasn't going to suck my dick, I wasn't going to suck his, and no one was going to get fucked. And I was okay with it. I find it really problematic for people to say that they're totally against this or that they have a problem with it, and to be like, well, you came over here, so you should just expect that we're going to fuck. Like, that's just really toxic to me. Now, when it comes to relationships, that's where I think you really need to sit down and say, look, this is what I am coming to the table with. These are the things that I'm willing to do. These things I'm not willing to do, especially, if you're really romantically involved with someone, have clear lines of communication about that. Because I've seen unfortunately some situations where maybe there wasn't that good communication and the relationship falls apart because one partner discovers down the line that the other partner doesn't want to have sex at all, or wants to have it so sparsely that the sexual partner, the one that's either allosexual or maybe even hypersexual, who wants to have it all the time, is now feeling like, well, I feel like I got cheated, and then sometimes we'll end up stepping outside the relationship. And so yeah, it can get really messy.
Absolutely.
I've not had any negative experiences thus far with anyone on the asexual spectrum.
Coming from someone who is, who does fall on the spectrum, I can speak to that at a personal level. It is something that I've kind of come into awareness of recently. And there are prior relationships that I had where, just as you were talking about, didn't have that clear line of communication, didn't set those expectations, and there ended up being a lot of pain in the relationship because of that disconnect where one person had a really high sex drive and wanted that a lot. I did not, and that led to a lot of friction, a lot of pain that would have been avoided with better communication. So I can speak to that from a personal level, how important that is.
I want to put it out there for you guys, actually, just as a thought that's come to mind. Body positivity, is a very important movement that's come around that more of us as gainers should be mindful of. How does that factor in when we engage with civilian types?
I'm going to say necessarily as civilians, because I think this also applies to other gainers as well. But okay. I think for more people, the body positivity does just need to come from a place of non-judgment and empathy, which is really coming from a place with a lack of judgment. Saying, because even as gainers, there are some people who still struggle with body positivity and body image issues. And I know some people, so for example, I can kind of take this as a specific example. There are a lot of terms in the gainer community thrown about like pig. A lot of us focus on that and using various forms of that term. To some people, that's really empowering, and other people love it and they call each other pigs all the time, and that's great. For others, it is a real, not even necessarily a trigger word, but it takes them out of that headspace and puts a negative feeling in. Coming from that, from a sense of empathy and saying, okay, I understand, back off, and that's not part of even though it's something for me, it's not necessarily something for you, and being able to back off of that. And I think that specific feeling extends to the body positive movement in general, meeting people where they are and understanding their journey with their own body and being supportive of that.
I think we really need to eliminate shame. This body shaming, kink shaming, we've really got to liberate ourselves from this idea of the invisible audience, because in truth, like when I started the gaining process, I did suffer a bit from this invisible audience syndrome, where I thought that people were going to be specifically looking for it to happen. Like I would go out, someone would notice that I was larger, and like suddenly everyone's pointing like, he's getting fat on purpose. And I feel like a lot of people suffer from this. And if we could all take a breath and realize that people probably aren't watching us that closely or don't even care. But then the cultural thing about fat shaming, body shaming, kink shaming, it all comes from this society stuff, especially here in the USA, because we're very prudish. For as much as sex sells in this country, we really have an issue with it. And we need to stop looking at someone and just immediately picking them apart. Mm-hmm. It's born out of this terrible insecurity with yourself. When you look at someone else, you just immediately start pointing out all their flaws. That's got to stop. We're never going to get anywhere if we keep doing this. And every time you open up a tabloid magazine or any one of those celebrity magazines and you see pictures of some paparazzi has taken some very unflattering photos of a celebrity not looking their best, or maybe they put on a few pounds and the whole tagline is, oh, look, they've ruined their body, or what have they done to themselves, yada, yada. That all has to go away.
Absolutely.
Santa, you there? Little Timmy, he wants to add this to his wish list. And, hopefully, do you know what? By our Christmas episode, I hope we can have an answer as on whether or not these will be delivered for Christmas morning. But, I think while we can wish for these things, I think the takeaway for all of us, including listeners, is, there's no monolithic thing that's going to happen that's going to eradicate these things. It's going to come down to individual works done by each and every one of us, much like racism, much like everything else bad and nasty in our world. It is only going to find a resolution when each and every one of us acknowledges the biases and nasty negativities within ourselves and takes proactive steps away from the bad towards making the right decisions. So that's just a note out there for everyone. If you do some introspection and you find some kinds of bias of any kind, take a look, work on those, and work through them. That's how we're going to do better and come to the other side of this. I do want to put it out there. We have some listener questions. If you're up for those, Hudson.
Sure, go ahead.
Fantastic. So first question we have here is, if I'm bellysexual, but not focused in genital-focused sex towards any gender, can I still be considered asexual?
So that was a really interesting question. My initial gut reaction is yes, because primarily labels are there for the people who use them. So if you've done the introspection, if you've done your thinking, and however your individual sexuality is expressed, if knowing all the definitions and all of the labels that are out there, if you feel asexual is the best fit for you and the best descriptor, then you're asexual. It's for you to decide. Based on what you said here, yes, I'd say so. Specifically, not focusing on the genital focus us, but enjoying sexual expression through through other means. Yeah, I would say so. I think from somewhere on the gray spectrum, most likely. But again, it's up to you to decide. It's your label to claim, whichever label you feel fits.
I like that. Tim, any thoughts to the question?
I would just echo what Hudson said. I mean, the point about you get to determine what you're called. Because for too long in society, you're just having stuff thrown at you and said, oh, you're this, you're that. And, when I was a young gay, I had things thrown at me and I just had to roll with it because I didn't, I feel like my generation of gay didn't know how to take labels and take control of them. So I was labeled as a twink. I never felt like a twink. I don't think I ever really fit the stereotype of a twink. I didn't really like it, but I ran with it just because it's what everyone was calling me. And then when I hit, late 20s, about to approach 30, people started calling me a twunk. And I'm like, what the fuck is a twunk? And they're like, it's a twink past his prime. I'm like, well, can we think of something less pejorative to call me?
It's like you
can we think of something that sounds a little bit nicer, please?
It's basically like the gay version saying, you're a has-been. Like,
yeah. And it doesn't take like, I don't get insulted easily, but that one was like, seriously? It's like saying, oh, you're just a wash-up now. You're like, you used to be hot, but now you're just that creepy guy sitting at the corner at the end of the bar nursing his beer and no one's talking to him.
And I mean, there's a whole lot that goes into that, mostly by also saying that considering that someone who is approaching 30 as past their prime is harmful in and of itself, because you've got so much left. Ageism in the gay community. That's another topic you can use.
Didn't this term come about from what's that show? It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Like,
oh god, yeah,
fucking straight dude bro show written by straight showrunners creating queer terms. Fuck those cunts. We don't have to take shit from them. What the fuck do they know? Susan and Brandon know all about breeding and overpopulating. Like that's their skill set.
Well, and because my mind goes where it goes. When I heard twunk, I was like, is that like the past participle of twink? Twink, twank, twunk. Like, is that like, can you conjugate twink for me?
And in all seriousness, when we use labels in the gay community, they really are just a form of shorthand for a set of attributes, attractions, and otherwise. And so they are, by definition, just a set of attributes. And if they don't fit you, there's no purity test associated with specifically this question, whether or not you're ace. It is, do the attributes fit you in any context? And if so, you can claim that label for yourself and use it. And if it doesn't fit and you don't like it personally, then you don't have to. It's there for you to use. And I think a label is not the end all be all. It's just a shorthand. And that's something that's important for people to remember.
You ever see that TV show, The Real O'Neills, about the young gay guy in high school. He's coming out and he's trying to figure out his way in the world. I remember in his head, he was having this fantasy of like he's sitting down with a panel of older gays and they're sort of teaching him the way. And the head guy's like, I'm a bear. We're usually barrel chested, hairy, wear a lot of flannel, blah, blah, blah. And they're going down the line. Finally, they get to the last guy and he's like, I'm a giraffe because I'm tall. Don't know why they can't just call me tall.
No, it very much is that. I think this extends far beyond the gay community, but it does come up specifically there, is this obsession with, fitting people into groups and putting people into boxes and saying, if this label fits, then I know all these other things about you. And they're not always true. But so it's important to take what you can out of a label, take what empowers you, and leave what doesn't behind. That's all it's about.
So our final question of the day: are many of us actually homosexual, or are we so autosexual that we project that desire onto others?
I'm not gonna lie. I love this kind of question because of just how philosophical it is. Like, is anything really this thing, or are we all just this other thing? So I'll say this: homosexuality is real. I think it's something that's kind of particularly in the gay community because a lot of gay people, especially younger gay people, struggle with this idea of, am I attracted to this person or do I just want to be this person?
Yes.
And so I think that's kind of where that comes from, is trying to figure out the difference between the two. So I'd say no, I don't think that's true. I think there is actual homosexuality because, and the best example I can give is, for myself, the kind of things that I'm attracted to for a while are not the kind of things that I want for myself. Like, I think everyone has I have some level of attraction to guys who are super freaking bodybuilder ripped. I don't want that for myself. That is not the body that I aspire to, but I can still see the level of attraction at varying levels that goes into that. So it's not just, an expression of myself.
As far as me personally, it's definitely more just, I know I'm homosexual because I don't really get turned on by myself that much. I mean, it was a recent thing for me to have this happen. I think I told you this story once before, that I was having a night where I was trying to take care of myself and nothing was really working. For some reason, my porn collection wasn't quite hitting the nerve it needed to hit, but there's a mirror to my left, and I looked at myself for the first time, just sort of since I put on so much weight. And I was like, holy shit, is that me? And I kept staring at it. And so I decided to take a hit of poppers. I don't know how people feel about that, but personally, I use them. So took a hit of poppers. And then before I knew it, it was on. I was like, yes, this is exactly where this is going. But that's a recent development for me. For other people, I suppose there is something to the whole autosexual thing, because I know a lot of couples that look a lot alike, and they tend to go solely after what they are. Like the muscle stud guys that I've known, they go after other muscle stud guys that are usually sometimes they're the same hair and eye color. Sometimes they're not too that different in the shape of the face or body. I mean, it seems like there is a touch of narcissism that runs through several communities, and it wouldn't surprise me if autosexuality was really at the base of this and not actually homosexuality. For me, no, though. I'm definitely just gay.
Yeah, I think there's some level to that. Definitely, the distinction between saying pure sexual attraction to yourself versus going after the thing that you like, and kind of like I mentioned, what you want to be. There's a weird conflict in gay men. It's what do I want to be versus what am I attracted to? And for some people that overlap is very large. For some people they're totally different, like in my case. And so I think for you, you might be onto something in terms of they might overlap a lot in those specific communities or in those relationships that and that's just more the variation of sexuality.
So Matt he pulled up an article of famous gay couples, right? And he's scrolling through them and he's showing them to me, and I'm like, oh my God, they all are married to their duplicates. They all find the exact same type of looking guy, and it's even Anderson Cooper and his husband, it's Anderson is the silver fox and his husband has black hair, but I mean, they were almost wearing the exact same suit, and I was like, God, they really do just find carbon copies of themselves.
It's quite interesting, but I think, not to try and put a neat little bow on everything for the sake of time, but truly, I think the summation of a lot of what we've spoken about tonight is that spectrums are big, you know, and just because something is one way for someone doesn't mean it can't be a different way for you. So long as you do the introspection and work on what you believe to be the case, you're probably going to strike gold. And no one can tell you shit. You know you better than anyone else. It's no one's place to tell you anything other than. So if you've got an idea of who you could be, work with that, explore that, and work on it a bit, and you might discover something entirely new, or you might discover that it was the case all along. Either way, it doesn't matter, because you're not going to intrinsically change if your label changes. Your label's only going to change because that label is going to work for you better than the one you had previously. So take no umbrage with all those bits and pieces. Take the opportunity and the resource and get to know yourself a little bit better. But that's about all the time we have for this week on the Thicc Radio. Hudson, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. Where can we find you?
So just like the name, Tank Hudson, on Grommr, on Twitter. Come check me out. I sometimes post funny things, sometimes post hot things, and you can hear me ramble more, which I'm sure more people are just so eager to hear after. But thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you both.
No worries. And listen, thank you so much again for being a guest. We just want to put a call out there for the Asexual Visibility and Education Network. Shorthand is AVEN. Easy enough to find online. They are a great source for asexual resources. So please, please, please go and check them out. That is our strong recommendation this week here on Thicc Radio. But I just want to say you can always find me on Grommr and Instagram at stannnum, and Twitter and YouTube at stannnum.bsky.
And you can find me on Grommr as Orpheus. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter as Thiccy Mouse. And of course, you can find more of what we've talked about today on Instagram at Thicc Radio and on Patreon at Thicc Radio. Until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stan and Thiccy Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by Stannon.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.